Hey guys, welcome to the channel. It's Jack with Stronghold Strength and Conditioning. And today, we're answering the question, why do my shoulder blades stick out? Otherwise known as scapular winging. But before we get into that, make sure you take a moment and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on future content like this. Every Thursday, I'm putting out videos showing you how to resolve aches and pains, prevent injuries, and ultimately improve your performance inside the gym and outside the gym. And it doesn't really get much cooler than that, so take advantage of it. Ready? Let's get into this one. All right guys, the question of the day, why do my shoulder blades stick out? And as I said already, more technically known as scapular winging. This is what you're struggling with, and we gotta understand a few things here. What structures are involved, what's the musculature that's involved, and what's the actual innervation. If you're getting aches and pains associated with it, this is a real problem, and we need to kind of understand overall movement patterning, how to correct it, and that's what we're going to be diving into today. So first off, I want to talk about the actual structures that are involved here. When we look at our shoulder, it's made up of a few pieces and parts as far as our skeletal structure go. The rib cage itself actually plays a part because our scapula is intended to articulate along the rib cage. It's kind of what we'd call a soft joint because it's completely surrounded by soft tissues and connected to the rib cage through musculature and soft tissues there. So it kind of glides along, and it's not a joint-to-joint thing necessarily, or bone-to-bone thing I should say, but it is kind of a joint in itself. Now the scapula has the glenohumeral joint, which is where our humerus connects into the scapula. Now that is separate in itself. A lot of times we make the mistake of thinking of our shoulder being all one piece. We need to be able to differentiate between the scapula and the glenohumeral joint and what's going on at both, because they create separate movements. Together they create a lot of movement, but individually they should have function of their own. And then also we have the AC joint, which is where the clavicle comes in and connects over the glenohumeral joint itself. So it comes from the sternum in the middle and then out over the glenohumeral joint to finish off our shoulder joint altogether. So once again, that is the rib cage is part of this, the scapula is part of this, and then the humerus and glenohumeral joint and the AC joint. That is where we're looking at as far as structures go. With musculature, we're talking about the upper trap, levator scapula, the rhomboids, the mid trap, the lower trap, the serratus anterior, the muscles of the rotator's cuff. So we have supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and subscapularis there, teres minor, teres major, and all that musculature is part of the upper back mainly there. We also have the front side, which is pec major, pec minor. We have the bicep connecting in there. We have the triceps connecting in there. We have the rear deltoid, the medial deltoid, the front deltoid or anterior deltoid. Those are all muscles that are involved in shoulder movements. And that is important to understand because we're going to get into what's happening with this imbalance that we're seeing. Generally, overall, the thing that we're noticing is an imbalance in our ability to stabilize that scapula overall. So some muscles are overactive and some muscles are underactive. Generally, what you'll see is the serratus anterior being talked about. And that's because it creates the movement of protraction of the scapula, where it inserts at the inside of the shoulder blade toward the mid-back, deep to it, and then comes on the rib cage from the first all the way down to the 9th rib. So it fans out. It's a nice big muscle, and you can actually kind of feel it along the rib cage on the front side, and you can see it in leaner individuals on the front side of their rib cage here, going into the armpit, coming out to the front of the rib cage a little bit. Now the serratus anterior muscle itself is innervated from the cervical, the 5th to 7th range of the cervical spinal column. So if you've had any injury or you have any impingement at that range of your spinal column, it is possible that you are neurologically inhibited at the serratus anterior there. Doesn't mean that you're doomed. It just means know that this might be something that's working against you, and it might be part of your history that can piece together part of this puzzle as to why you're seeing this shoulder instability. So if you've had some form of neck injury, even if it's some form of impingement at the neck from that C5 to C7 range, this could be playing into your scapular winging. A big part of this is also understanding how to move well and the movements that each of the scapula and the glenohumeral joint should have individually all together. And the main movements that we see at the scapula are elevation, depression, retraction, and protraction. Now, the movements at the glenohumeral joint are flexion, extension, internal rotation, external rotation, and then we have abduction and adduction. So we're moving away, moving in, up and forward, and to the back. Generally, what we see is the actual glenohumeral joint and a lack of movement or range of motion and control at the glenohumeral joint affecting the overall scapular positioning and creating an adaptation here. So most cases, when we lack internal rotation, we see a thickening at the front of the capsule. This also inhibits our ability to externally rotate the shoulder, which is part of good stability in most of our movements when it comes to flexion and abduction. We need to be able to have that external rotation capability to stabilize and really help the scapula protract into that position where it gets depressed and protracted by the serratus. And if we don't have that, generally what we see is elevation from the upper trap, levator scapula. We see protraction coming from the pec minor mainly. We see shortening of the biceps tendon. We see a little bit of weakening and disengagement of teres and rear delt and the triceps on the back side. So it really is this muscular imbalance overall, and especially that serratus, which is why it gets so much focus. But the problem that we see with the most or majority of approaches is that they don't take into consideration the actual joint capsule that is affecting or limiting these ranges of motion and causing us to have this adaptation of movement. So if I can't reach overhead with my glenohumeral joint, what we see is my scapula elevate to create the reach to make up for that lack of range of motion at the glenohumeral joint. Same thing, if I lack internal rotation and I can't get that arm into an internally rotated position, then we see protraction and elevation occur from the pec minor and the trap and the levator scapula to create a faux internal rotation. My glenohumeral joint's not internally rotating here. It's my scapula that's creating something that's supposed to look like a movement that I should have. So those are movements that we really need to make sure that you have at the glenohumeral joint itself to be able to really fully make the most of all the training and all the strengthening of the serratus anterior that you guys are trying to do out there. And that is a key component. So what we're going to do here next is actually show you guys a few different mobilities that you can do to start to work at the glenohumeral joint itself and to help open up those ranges of motion so that we're not constantly relying on our compensation of elevation and protraction from muscles that aren't supposed to be involved, and we can more effectively train that serratus anterior when we get to those strengthening movements, because we will need to do that. We need to understand the muscle dynamics that when I reach up in flexion, I should have my serratus anterior engaged. I should feel my scapula depressed and retracted a little bit on the upper back there. It might start to glide some into that protracted position around the body, but I should not feel that scapula moving upward toward my ears at all and forward, hunching over in that position there. So let's go ahead and dive into these exercises, and we're going to show you first of all the joint, then we're going to look at the soft tissue surrounding, and then we're going to get into the actual strength exercises here. Ready? Here we go. All right guys, so for this first exercise here, we're going to be showing a banded distraction addressing the joint capsule of the glenohumeral joint. So what I want is the band anchored about shoulder height when I'm in a half kneeling position here. I'm going to wrap the band in this first position on the front of the shoulder and internally rotate my shoulder so that my arm is behind my back. I need my glutes engaged, I need my abs engaged, so my shoulder is stacked over my hips and I'm making sure that I'm not compensating in any way. The second position we're going to go into here is, once again, internal rotation with the arm in extension back behind us. So I wrap my wrist so that the band is between my middle finger and my ring finger, and then I turn away from the band with my thumb pointed down to the floor. Now in both of these, I want to make sure that the scapula is not going into elevation or protraction at all here. I want to keep my shoulder blades pulled down and back and really focus on just allowing the shoulders to come together in that positioning. The next position we're going to go into from this band here is into the internally rotated position with the band around the wrist. So here, once again, same concept. We do not want to have the band force us into that internal rotation, or I should say elevation and protraction of the scapula. The internal rotation should be happening at the glenohumeral joint here. I want my glutes to be engaged, I want my abs to be engaged. If those are not, then I'm going to be compensating in some way, shape, or form, and you can bet your bottom dollar that's going to happen. So butt engaged, stomach engaged, shoulder blades on the upper back in each of these positions. The last one I'm showing here, we're actually working in elevation and then depression. So I want to let the band actually pull my arm into that elevated position at the scapula, and then I'm pulling and retracting and depressing the scapula down on my back each time. What I'm doing, and it's kind of hard to see from this angle, so I apologize, is keeping my arm completely locked out straight. So I have a completely straight arm here in this one, and I'm reaching out, actually shrugging the shoulder on purpose, and that's to help me actually start to feel that glide a little bit better and the control. This is helping me stabilize from the musculature that should be pulling my scapula down and back into position when I'm reaching up overhead. Next, we're going to address some self-myofascial release techniques here. First of all, releasing the pec minor. The pec minor can play a role in actively protracting the shoulder and elevating it at the same time here. So generally we see shortening of the pec minor, the bicep tendons, the anterior deltoids, all of those get a little bit overactive and shorten. So I want to place that ball just below the clavicle and toward the armpit so that I'm able to start to roll on it a little bit. And I'm using a softball for this. Now if you're a lady, you can use the handle of a kettlebell to do this as well, because it'll give you a little more elevation from the floor. But for guys, softball works well. You'll see I'm tracing just under that clavicle, and I'm doing a pressure wave to search for any tissues that are tender to the pressure there. This is important because if I find those tissues, I want to be flexing and releasing on that to let it sink deeper in. In this next one, we're going to work the anterior deltoid. So now I'm moving up just above the shoulder on the front side, and this will catch some of that bicep insertion as well at the capsule. So here, once again, you'll notice that I'm putting the arm in internal rotation as I work the tissues. So we're working to open up that anterior portion of our body to help allow our body to restore a regular balance so we're not completely protracted and elevated all the time. So the last one we're going to address, other than the front of the shoulder, is the upper trap and levator scapula. So you'll see I'm riding with a lacrosse ball on this one just above the shoulder blade. And I'm going to do a few different things here. So you'll see me do some reaches, we'll try a 90-degree angle at the arm, and I'm also kind of just rolling across from the spinal column out toward the shoulder, riding along that supraspinatus, that upper trap range, and getting a little bit down in between the scapula and the spinal column with that lacrosse ball, getting into the levator scapula a little bit as well, because that can play a role in the elevation portion. So once again, the self-myofascial release is intended to open up those tissues that are overactive here, and I'm willing to bet you'll find some tenderness in them if this is true for you. All right, and finally we're gonna get to the strengthening portion here. So what I'm showing here is an external rotation biased overhead reach. And I wanna do this supinated because I'm learning how to actually stabilize my core in a neutral position. What's going on here is I have my glutes flexed. So I picked my butt up for a second, flexed my glutes, and put them back down to the mat. I have my abs engaged, and you'll note that I have a grip on the bar, underhand grip, so that my elbows sit inside of my wrist. So I actually have a Y shape here. I'm trying to reach out overhead, keeping the scapula retracted and depressed, so I don't want to feel them elevate at all as I reach that bar up overhead and fully extend the arms as much as I'm able to in that reach. That's the key there. We want to make sure that we don't lose any of that positioning as we reach that bar. The second one we're going to do here is still using that dowel, creating that external rotation at the shoulder. We're going to do a protracted plank here. And what I want to do is step out, and you'll see that my thoracic spinal column is actually in a little bit of flexion from the protraction. I'm pushing through my elbows, pushing through my forearm, but the external rotation also helps create more stability at my shoulder here. So that's what we're doing with the dowel. We're helping create more stability through external rotation. And in the beginning, we need to be a little bit assisted. Now to make this harder, I can turn this into a scapular push-up where I'll actually retract the scapula together toward the spinal column and then protract away once again. And you'll see that it's literally only happening at my shoulder blades. There's nothing going on at the rest of my body. My glutes stay engaged, my abs stay engaged. There's no change in my spinal column lower down there. Then from there, what we can do is actually take it another step further and do a body saw. And each of these, you'll notice that I maintain that external rotation at the shoulder. Now this isn't a very big body saw, but once again, we do want to create that protracted positioning and work from that protracted positioning, maintaining the spinal positioning as we rock in and rock out. Now, from a bear crawl position with the knees down, I can do scapular push-ups with the arms fully extended as well. And this is a great way just to learn this movement. It's really hard actually to try and keep that elbow completely locked out and not allow it to bend as we go into that fully protracted state there and then retract. So we need to have that control where we have that balance between triceps and biceps in this position here. And this is a good place to begin with the arms fully extended to learn how to push in that same frame there. The next thing you'll notice is that once again the spinal column doesn't change, the abs are engaged in that, and I'm not arching the back. Taking it a step further, we can go into the full plank position. So glutes engaged, abs engaged, pushing into protraction, pushing the floor away as much as possible, going into flexion at that upper thoracic range. And that is really where we're going to be strengthening that serratus anterior once again in this positioning. All right, guys, and there you have it. We've answered that question. Why do my shoulder blades stick out? Why am I struggling with scapular winging? And we've showed you how to go about fixing it in the fastest manner here. If you guys like this video, make sure you let me know by clicking that big thumbs up down below, and take a moment to share it with a friend who has some similar issues and struggles with this. You know they could use it, so take advantage of that free content. And if you have not already, make sure you take a moment and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on future content like this. Every Thursday, I'm putting out videos showing you how to resolve aches and pains, prevent injuries, and most importantly, optimize your performance inside and outside the gym so that you don't have to struggle with this kind of stuff. So, welcome to the Stronghold Army. Last but not least, if you guys want to take advantage of 7 days of free mobility training, I've got that programmed out for you. Just drop down to the description here and click that first link. It's called the 7-Day Mobility Training Challenge. This is an overall no equipment approach to improving your mobility at home, 15 minutes a day, and they're very quick sessions that you can do right online, whether it's on your phone or on a computer. You can take it with you somewhere and do this. So it's very accessible in that manner. All you gotta do is sign up and join the course. You guys will have direct access to me, so you can ask me questions there if you have any questions about it. and it will help you begin to really identify any underlying issues or mobility problems that you might not even be aware of right now. So if you lack range of motion, this can be a problem, and we're gonna really uncover those things over the next 7 days if you jump in that course. So take advantage of it. Until next week, guys, see you later.